on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
You end up with quite a thin character that doesn't quite fit, doesn't quite feel fully rounded. And it's quite obvious that you put them in just to serve the plot. And it's exactly the same as world building. World building really needs to be treated in exactly the same way as a character.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me in the same shirt as last week, Mark Dawson. Hello.
People may not have noticed. I mean, people listen so they don't know.
Oh, that's true. Very true. Although we have to be honest about this. You know, let's not try and mislead people. We haven't even stopped recording between the two episodes yet. So that's how seamless these two episodes have been.
It's a matter of trust, isn't it? We don't want to have trust issues.
No,
so
quite.
Yeah. So we still haven't been to Vegas, but this is now 2 weeks ago, I think, from the time.
Who knows? As this gets recorded, we may find in the future that we all tested positive for COVID tomorrow when we have our pre-flight tests and we can't go. So we might be talking about Vegas, and actually we are staying in the UK. It's entirely possible. I think it's unlikely, but you know. I feel fairly
I've got a test in about an hour and a half, so yeah, so do I. But we'll see how that goes. I know it's terrifying, this whole thing. When you actually come close to flying, you realise all the bureaucracy you go through and the worry and stress of it all.
It has been, I mean, I've not enjoyed it. I have to say, it's so complicated. All the things like the different tests and antigen tests, PCR tests.
Yeah.
You know, which one do we need? We've got to be 3 days before you fly. So when is the last time you can take it? When's the earliest you can take it? So for those on YouTube, this arrived in the post to me this week, recommended by Tom Ashford. So if that goes wrong, Tom's sacked. And because I was just a bit kind of paranoid that it wasn't going to come in time, I did book myself in for a kind of someone to shove something up my nose tomorrow at 9:00. So I've got two. I'll have two tests done. Hopefully both negative, but you know we will see.
I mean I've got 3 tests booked now.
Yeah. Well, the life I lead here, I don't really see anybody. Although of course both children are at school, so I suppose in that case I see about 100 people. But we'll have to see. Feel okay, certainly asymptomatic if we have got it, but you know.
I did do a home lateral flow last night just to just to sort of give me some sort of sense of security, and that was negative. So.
COVID.
Oh my God!
Oh dear. Right.
Okay, look, enough of our stuff. Bearing in mind this is going out after we may or may not have got back.
Yeah.
We are talking today about world building, which I think is something that applies to anybody who's writing a more than one book set in the same universe. It doesn't have to be epic fantasy or science fiction or urban fantasy, whatever. World building is getting consistency and making sure that you've created something that's not going to jar with your audience. Now, I think if you're writing fantasy, it does become a more complicated thing. And that's where this particular interview with Angeline Trevena, I think, is going to be very useful. So without further ado, let's talk to Angeline.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Angeline Trevena. Have I said? Trevena. There you go. I'm pleased I checked. Welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Lovely to have you here. You've got a little background there.
I have. It hides the mess that's beyond.
That's good. Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to learn more about what's scrawled on there. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what we're talking about. But Angeline, we are going to talk about world building, particularly, I think, for fantasy, science fiction, very important part of it. Particularly people writing in series and serials, having a grasp of that and the work that goes into it, and some of these, perhaps we'll talk about some of the hidden pitfalls of not getting it right as well. But why don't we start with a bit about you?
Yeah, so I am a British indie author. I mostly write dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction, which sort of edges into urban fantasy. I like mixing up futuristic tech with magic. So that's kind of my obsession. And I'm also a podcaster. I'm an events manager. I run workshops, and I'm a mum to 2 little boys. So I'm like super crazy busy.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I know that feeling, but it's, I think it's just one of those things in this modern world. There's a lot of us who end up doing lots of different things, but that's great. So hats off for you for doing everything. And being a mother is like an entire career and job in its own right, and then everything else has to get booted on top of that. So
very true.
How old are the boys?
5 and 9.
Wow, that is a busy time.
Yeah.
That is a busy time. I remember that bit. Okay, right. Anyway, we'll talk about publishing more than motherhood probably today. Let's talk about your books a little bit, actually. Dystopian, and you're British. Are your books set in a dystopian version of Britain? Some might say is here already, or are they set in a world we wouldn't recognise from planet Earth? Or
I mostly write in second world because I love fantasy, so I love creating entire worlds. I do have one book which is Post-Apoc, which is kind of it is set in a future post-apocalyptic Britain, but the towns that they visit are completely made up, because I don't, that thing where you set a story in a real live place and then everyone goes, oh no, you got that wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't exist. That's not right. So but part of the reason I love writing fantasy is because I don't like doing all the minute research. I like just making it up. So yeah, so mostly I write in second worlds.
Okay, so second world is a term for not Earth, basically another sort of made up world.
Not a real place that already exists.
Okay, well, you say, the minute research, like that's a chore for you, but I imagine, not chore, perhaps not the right word, but something you do have to pay attention to is getting the world right and being consistent, because I'm guessing that science fiction and fantasy authors are equally likely to pick up on something that's inconsistent in the universe you created, right?
Yeah, when you're creating your own universe, of course, you're in control of the rules.
You're God.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the reason I absolutely love doing it. Yes, you absolutely are God. So you create the rules. You decide what can and can't happen. But what's really important, I mean, you can go crazy. You can go crazy when you're creating your own world, and feel free to do that because it usually turns out pretty awesome. But the thing that you've really got to watch is that everything makes sense in your world. So if you put a crazy, weird thing in, you've got to explain why it happened. You've got to know how that became the norm in society and why it makes sense in your world. So yeah, there is research to do. I do a lot of research on poisons. I'm sure they're going to come for me pretty soon, the amount of research I do. I did a lot of research on limpets for one of my books. So I tend to do really weird, random little bits of research. But yeah, second world, I have so much freedom. And like you say, yeah, I get to be God. And I like that.
So you say you need to know why things happen. You need to and you're not just talking about what's on the page here. You're talking about you understanding stuff that doesn't even make it onto the page.
Yeah, but it's no different that when you create a character, your character has backstory. And you know that backstory. We know what has happened to this character in the past, what traumas, what influences they've had to make them who they are, like why they've got particular anxieties, why they've got particular neuroses, why they believe certain things. It's all in their backstory, which doesn't necessarily all end up in the story. And world building is exactly the same. Your world has a backstory. So the reason your world has certain cultural things, certain norms, certain values, certain things that happen is because of your world's backstory. So just as we create characters and we understand their whole backstory, that's how you want to do your world building, even if it doesn't all end up in the book.
And what happens when you've created something, it's published and it's out there, and then for the convenience of a story, you sort of feel that you wish you hadn't had that restriction on it? Have you had a situation like that, like, I don't know, to do with gravity or something, where you just think, oh God, of course he can't do that, can he? Because I've said this is how it works. Do you have some freedom to play with things?
I think you do, because if you're writing a sequel, you can have a new scientific discovery happen. You could have a new magic spell, or like ancient magic knowledge could be uncovered. If it's something in society, so some sort of restriction that's created by people, like a law or a government structure, then you can have an election and you can have a new government come in, or you can even have a revolution, So yeah, absolutely. There's freedom to be able to change the rules as you go along. But again, you need to be making sure that it makes sense. You can't suddenly have a planet change its force of gravity and for no reason, just other than you wanted to. That's the sort of thing readers will pick up on and go, hold on, just like if you change a character's name by accident.
Yeah, and you want there to be some rules and a framework, right, to operate in, because people like that. And if it gets too convenient that things change, I think readers would sense that, wouldn't they?
Yeah, because you end up with that God in the machine moment where, oh, that was convenient. Oh, I need this to happen, so I'll change this completely so that it can happen. Because again, it's like you can create characters just for a certain plot point. Sometimes people do that and you end up with quite a thin character that doesn't quite fit, doesn't quite feel fully rounded. And it's quite obvious that you put them in just to serve the plot. And again, it's exactly the same as world building. World building really needs to be treated in exactly the same way as a character, which not a lot of people always realize that. And even if they're doing that, they don't realize that that's what they're doing. So it's basically creating a character, but a world. Yeah,
that's a really good way of doing it. I mean, they do talk about landscapes being a character in a book, and particularly, just a sort of non-fantasy book, like a regional detective in a certain part of the world, in the West Country, for instance, where the countryside and the geography become a character and a part of the book.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
the same way of thinking about it, a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah. So you've written books, Angeline, on this subject.
Yes, I have 4 world building books out at the moment. So I started off with 30 Days of World Building, which it's 30 world building prompts. So what it does is it takes you from absolute starting point through to creating an entire world in 30 prompts. So obviously, if you do 1 per day, then within a month, you've got an entire world built. Then I went on to my second one, How to Destroy the World, is about writing dystopia and post-apocalyptic worlds. Of course, they're my 2 favorite genres. But interestingly enough, I planned that book at the end of 2019. I wrote it at the beginning of 2020.
Right.
And I finished it in March 2020. And I was like, oh my goodness, the world's blowing up.
Yeah, and that must have been
I've just written this book. So I kind of released it a little bit apologetically. And I didn't make a big fanfare of it. But actually, it's been really popular and people really like it. I've also got From Sanctity to Sorcery, which is building magic systems and belief systems, so religions or other kinds of belief systems. And my latest one is How to Create History, which is about creating history, myths, and monsters for your world and tying those all together.
Okay, well, that sounds great. Well, let's should we talk about the first one then, the base of the sort of 30 prompts you've written into? It's a nice, convenient way of doing it. So what sort of things are we talking about for somebody at the beginning, perhaps, of their writing career, looking for science fiction? What should they be thinking about?
So the very first prompt in the book is to work out the genre that you're going to be writing, which may seem slightly unrelated, but the genre and the subgenre that you want to write can have a big bearing on the kind of world you're going to create. So, for example, if you want to write urban fantasy, you're probably only going to be building 1 city You might build more than that, but largely you're probably only going to be building one city, as opposed to if you're writing a space opera, you've got a lot of work because you've got a whole load of different planets. They're all going to have different life forms, different kind of terrains. So yeah, the genre that you write really tells you what kind of world you're going to create a lot. So that's the first prompt. That's always the first place that somebody should start. And then we go on to the most fun, which is map drawing.
Okay.
Drawing
We'll talk about maps in a second. But genre. I mean, God, so important in almost every aspect of marketing as well. We say that if you haven't nailed the genre you're writing in, even if it's not a genre, it's like literary fiction or something, you just need to know right from the beginning. It just helps everything. Things become very difficult for you, and that disconnect between reader expectation and what you've delivered is a horrible thing, and it's where you get bad reviews. So what a great start for anything, but particularly for people looking to actually market and sell their books in the future as well, getting that right. Interesting that's the first thing you come up with as well in writing. Okay, so maps are your thing, are they?
Oh, I love maps.
And this is, well, I think as kids, I think we all probably drew maps at some point, didn't we? A lot of famous five and stuff like that. So you draw this map and create this one. That's probably the world building that children start with at some point. Just start with a map, and there's a mountain here, and probably sparked by the books we read then. So it's an important part of world building.
I think it really is a very important part of world building, because it's very easy to get lost in your world when you're writing your book, especially if you're writing over an entire series. You might want your characters to travel from point A to point B. And if you get that muddled, like if at one point B is a small coastal town and then suddenly it's in the mountains, it's one of those things your readers are going to notice that, and they're going to pull you up on it in the reviews. So it just stops you getting lost in your world. But I know that a lot of writers in particular, when they think about drawing a map, they kind of freak out and go, I'm no good at drawing. And I totally get that. I totally understand. But honestly, when you're writing, your map is just for you. It doesn't have to be beautiful, and it doesn't have to be stunning at all. It can be like a childlike scrawl on the back of an envelope, as long as you know where everywhere is and how it connects. And things like the distances between places, you need to have a rough idea of how long it takes to travel between places and what kind of terrain your characters are traveling over, so that they can be prepared for the journey.
Yeah, this reminds me a bit of the Game of Thrones TV adaptation, where in the first few series, it was a massive part of the series was how long it took to get from north to south in the land. By the end of it, they'd forgotten that. And suddenly people just seemed to appear down in King's Landing the day after they said it was a good idea to go there, which was annoying to watch it, right, as fans. And I know they had pressure to suddenly get the series done, but that is annoying. So you want to avoid that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those inconsistencies that makes your world seem less believable. And it's the sort of inconsistencies that will throw your readers out of your world, which is like the last thing you want. So
yeah. And for people building galaxies, this is, it's a map. You're going to have maps within maps, aren't you?
Maps and maps. A map. This is why I don't write space opera.
Yeah. Although I do notice in Star Wars type things that when they go to another planet, there is basically one place they go to on the planet. It's like a city. Yeah. Occasionally there's a bit of traveling within the planet, but you go to this planet for that, you go to Mos Eisley or, Hoth or whatever, but they don't. In reality, you'd land on a planet the size of Earth, wouldn't you? And you'd be 20,000 miles away from where you need to be in lots of other cities, but it doesn't work like that in science fiction. You just go there for this one thing.
We'll forgive them. It's a lot of...
Yeah. Okay. So map building, which sounds really fun, awesome fun, actually. Interesting. I write in contemporary, well, not contemporary, 1960s Earth, so real world. But I refer to maps all the time. In fact, I refer not just because my character, I wonder how far Oxford is away. Is that something he would drive in a day, or does he have to fly or whatever? So I look at that, but I also go back and find contemporary 60s maps to make sure the road I'm talking about was there in the 1960s. So it's the same sort of thing in a way, just making sure it is based on something that's consistent.
Yeah, absolutely. And consistency is absolute key, as it is in any part of writing. really. And that's why one of the things I really suggest is, especially if you're writing a series, to have a series Bible or a world building Bible. And that's why my world building books, the paperback version is a workbook, so it has loads of space for people to write answers to all of the prompts. So what you have at the end of the 30 days, when you've created your whole world, you have a world building Bible that you can have next to you as you're writing your story. So you can keep flipping through and making sure you're checking all your details and getting all of them right. I've made that horrible mistake before where I think I was on book 3 of a series and I hadn't written a world building Bible, which was very silly. And I had to literally pick up book 1 and look through it to find the name of some random guy's wife, because I didn't have a clue. So yeah, it's all those things that and it doesn't matter what genre you're writing. Especially if you're writing a series of books, make sure you have a series Bible so you can write all these things down, because you will forget. I do all the time.
And how should people organise the Bible? Is there a particular way you recommend? Because I don't know how I would start. Is it alphabetical, or is it like a glossary, or is it closer to the actual Bible, kind of series of stories?
Yeah, I say do whatever works for you, because some people really like to work digitally. And there are a lot of digital programs. There are a lot of apps that you can use to organize notes in. A lot of people, for example, will use Scrivener and be able to move their notes around. I'm a tactile girl. I like notebooks and pens. So each of my series Bibles are literally a notebook. And what I tend to do is I split the book in half. So the front half of the book is all my characters. So I just write their names at the top of the page, and I just have a page for each character. And then the second half is my world building. So like each institution or any information like a magic system, things like that, they all happen in the back of the notebook. That's when I'm being organized, which doesn't always happen.
It sounds like good advice, though. Okay, so I don't suppose...
It's really good advice.
Yeah. Nice though it would be to go through the next 28 tips. I don't suppose we can do all of them, but I'm keen to explore a few more of the sort of key ones that we can talk about in a bit more detail. So do you want to pick a few more out for us?
Okay, so another thing that I quite enjoy is education. So you need to think about the structure of education and how it fits into your world. Now, the fun thing about world building is it's a bit of a rabbit hole to fall down, because as soon as you create one thing, you realize how much it ties into other things. So, for example, education, you've got to think about the school year. Now, here in the UK, our school year is still based on the farming year. The reason we have 6 weeks holiday in the summer is so that the farming children can help with the harvest. And it's based around Christianity as well. So we have 2 weeks off at Christmas, we have 2 weeks off at Easter. But if you're writing a secondary world that doesn't have Christianity in it, then where are you putting your holidays for school, and why are you putting them there? So suddenly that fits into maybe the religion in your world, it fits into the culture in your world, it also fits into the sort of jobs that people do. And you've also got to think about what age people go to school, and more importantly, what age they leave school and what happens when they leave school. And again, that will depend on whether it's an agricultural setting that you're creating, or maybe boys go off to become sailors at like 14 years old and girls are allowed to stay at school till they're 16. Maybe girls aren't allowed to go to school at all. Maybe poor people can't access school. Maybe there are different kinds of schools. So as you can see, it's this complete rabbit hole that every single aspect of world building ties into everything else. The way I always talk about it is it's if you imagine a pool and you drop a pebble in. So every time you create something in your world, it's like dropping a pebble into this still water and it creates ripples. And then you drop another one in because you create something else. And then you drop another one in, and all those ripples are rippling against each other and they all affect each other. And yeah, that's the analogy I always use for world building. But yeah, you see how like just one aspect ties into so many other things. And yeah, it's a complete rabbit hole, but I love it.
Yeah.
I get very excited over world building.
I can tell. And no, that's a good thing. And the inspiration for some of these ideas, I mean, you talk about, do girls go to school, for instance, and almost everything you suggested there's a possibility you need to decide about is something that's unfortunately either happening today somewhere in the world or has happened in history. So you only have to look back. That's, I guess, you need to make decisions about. This might be another one of your points, the level of industrialization of where your civilization is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, of course, you might be writing medieval fantasy or you might be writing like cyberpunk. And so they are incredibly different things. The technology that's available, the medical understanding, the amount of people who are able to read and write in those worlds are going to be totally different. And I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy writing like dystopian and post-apocalyptic, because I get to write about the change. Because like post-apocalyptic, you can just wipe out technology, or you can wipe out this, you can wipe out that. And dystopian worlds, you can destroy knowledge, or you can hoard knowledge, or you can take it away from people. And I love writing about that change. I love seeing the contrast between like what was and what is, or what could be. And it's so, again, it comes back to genre again. It's another aspect where you need to understand your genre. You need to understand the tropes and the norms of your genre. And that's how you really kick off your world building and know what you need to world build.
What can you just tell me the difference between post-apocalyptic and dystopian?
Okay, so post-apocalyptic is after an event has happened, a big world-changing event. So it might be a meteor striking the earth. It might be a zombie apocalypse. So it's a big change. It's a big change that has affected the entire world and changed like everything. Whereas dystopian is just a horrible world. It's literally just a horrible world to live in. So there may not have been some big catastrophic event that created a dystopian world. You can gradually come into a dystopian world. It can, slowly change. Like you said at the top of the interview, we may be living in one now. So.
Yeah. Feels like it sometimes. Okay, so you've got your basic building blocks we've talked about here. I'm sure your book goes into more detail about stuff. I'm thinking also some of the other basics that you need to get right is biology, particularly science fiction. It's another thing that becomes quite convenient in Star Wars and other things, that people land on planets and can breathe the air easily. But in reality, there's not another planet in our solar system that humans can breathe on.
Yeah.
So it's something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that I've kind of ruined myself with the whole being such a world building nerd, because whenever I watch something or read something, I'm like, but that wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be right. Like one of the ones that particularly annoys me in places, I love it though, is James Cameron's Avatar. I love that movie. And it does what it sets out to do. But there are certain evolutionary things that I'm like, but why would it do that? The biggest problem I have is the whole thing that like the Na'vi can connect and control the minds of the creatures. Like, why would you evolve such a huge, that's a bad thing to be, that you can just be taken over. You can be mind controlled just like that. Why would all the animals evolve like that? But, I understand that like it's all about connectedness, and that's one of the themes of it. So yeah, it does what it sets out to do, but every time it just kind of niggles me. And it is just little things like that. It goes back again to making sure that things make sense in your world and make sense to the history of the world and the evolution of the world. And yeah, if you're creating non-human characters, then you've got to think about that. If you have a planet with much, much stronger gravity, than it has on Earth. You need to know what's going to happen to humans when they go on that planet. And you need to think about how the animals and the creatures there would evolve differently and what effect it would have on like the plants that are there. And yeah, it gets very in depth. And like I say, I don't write space opera or anything like that, or hard sci-fi. And I have huge respect for people who do, because the amount of research they have to do is just insane.
Yeah, there's big universes. Well, Avatar is a good example, actually, where they do take account of the fact that they can't breathe the air in that.
They do, but they don't take account of a change in gravity.
Right.
Because all of the creatures there are much bigger than them.
Right.
So to me, that makes
stronger gravity, yeah.
Gravity, but it doesn't affect them in any way. So,
but they're not.
Yeah.
This sort of brings me on to the sort of area I want to talk about before we finish, which is whether the world building and being a slave to the consistency can get in the way of a story and keeping that balance. And I'm minded of James Cameron again, who gets asked frequently whenever he meets fans in elevators, couldn't Jack have got onto that bit of wood? And in the end, he said, I thought it was a really brilliant answer. He said, the reason Jack couldn't have got on to that square of wood at the end of Titanic is because in the script it said he drowned.
Yeah.
And that's what the fans need to understand, is that's what was happening there. And it doesn't really matter about what shape the size of the wood is. But it does matter a little bit, doesn't it? Because what you don't want is the audience to be a bit distracted thinking, he could have got onto that. It should have, perhaps they've done it a bit better where she was just clinging onto something just about. And so there's that balance there, isn't there, between not just understanding you're telling a story and not being a slave to the world that will distract the audience from that.
Yeah, definitely. It's very much about finding the balance, and you are likely to almost certain to do a heck of a lot more world building than actually makes it into the book. I'm actually a discovery writer. I'm a true, pure discovery writer. I've started writing books before with nothing more than the main character's name. But what I do have is the world building. So my world building happens before I start writing my book. I will start writing my book with no idea what I'm writing at all, but I will have done the world building. So when I'm writing, I'll sometimes write myself into a corner and go, okay, I can't let this plot point happen because the world won't let me. So I can change that. I can rewrite the world building and I can change it to serve the plot. But yeah, obviously then I have to backwards engineer it. So backwards engineering is when you go, well, this is the case in my world. I need to find out how it got to this point, why it happened. So when you're world building forwards in time, you're asking yourself, what if? So what if this happened? What would the result of this be? When you're backwards engineering, you're asking yourself, why? So this is the case in my world. Why has that happened? Why has society come to this point that it is like this? So when you're writing, yeah, you're God, you can change things, but make sure you're doing the work to make it make sense so that you're not just putting things in just to serve the plot so that everyone questions it and goes, well, why is it like that? Or come up with a really clever answer.
Yeah, that gets laid down there so it's not a distraction when it later happens. And also, I guess it's important not to stuff your book with stuff that you've decided and as part of your world building, to resist the temptation to show off your research, if you like, and keep it out if you don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the question I get asked the most. How do you know what world building you need to put in your book and what not to put in? So I have a bit of a rule. It's one of those flexible rules. There are times that you'll have to step outside of it. But ideally, any world building that makes it to your book should do one of three things. So it should either reveal something about the character, it should either push the plot forward, or it should be exploring themes, or it can be doing more than one of those things. If it's doing none of those things, then you need to ask yourself if it really needs to be in there. It might be that you do, it is a flexible rule where sometimes you might have to step outside of that. And make sure as much as possible you're showing your world building rather than just telling it. There are going to be times when you need to just tell world building, but the ideal way is to show it through action. So it might just be as simple as a way a character reacts to something that would tell you whether it's normal or not normal in that world, or through action, the way they interact with the world. Like if they get arrested for a certain thing, then you know that that's illegal in that world. So that's the best way to reveal your world building, through action. You can also reveal it through conversation, although try to avoid the, as you know, blah, 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 which is just a different way of info dumping. But yeah, sometimes you will have to tell a bit of world building, but make sure it's either revealing character, pushing your plot forward, or exploring themes of your book. And those are the ideal things. It should be doing one or more of those.
Yeah. Well, that comes back to a lot of the stuff we talk about with writing is showing, not telling, and trusting your reader. You don't have to, if they're doing things a particular way in a spaceport because of gravity, you don't have to spell it out. Sometimes, as you say, it'll become obvious to them. Trust the reader. It's difficult. That's the most difficult thing. Those of us who are new to writing, is I think the most difficult thing.
It's one of those things that it can only be learned through just doing it. Yeah. The more books you write, the more you know how to do it. So yeah, it's just practice.
Yeah. Well, that 30 points, 30 sort of prompts for world building is a brilliant start for your series. But you say the other three, remind me what the other three books go into.
So How to Destroy the World is dystopia and post-apocalyptic. From Sanctity to Sorcery is magic systems and belief systems. And How to Create History is history, myths, and monsters. Okay, well, let's talk about magic for a little bit then. And it's another area that you write in. And I don't write magic. In fact, I think my books are kind of the opposite, because they're kind of engineering-y, where there's fixed problems and compromises to make because things don't work or have to be fitted in. Whereas magic, part of me thinks, well, isn't it easy if it's magic? Because you can just say, well, that's magic. And that's, a spell in Hogwarts suddenly solves everything very quickly and easily. Presumably you've got to do the same thing. You've got to put some restrictions on it. Otherwise it's not believable or fun. Yeah, absolutely. Because if magic is all powerful and no restrictions and no consequences of using it, then you set up your character's main goal that they want to get to through your book. They achieve it on page 1, and that's the end of your story. So magic systems, you can make very, very tight magic systems. And you say that your engineering writing is like the opposite. Not at all. It's actually incredibly similar to when you're writing a really strict, tight magic system. You can write a looser, more chaotic magic system. But the things that you need, yes, you absolutely need restrictions, especially if you're writing a very tight magic system. And you can use this as conflict points. So your character might need a certain herb or a certain kind of metal. And that might be something that's really rare in your world. It might be something that's really expensive, or it might be something that's illegal to have. It might be that your magic works much better when you're near the sea or by a lake. It might be that you can't use magic under a full moon. So you put these restrictions in order so that you can create conflict, which of course is the basis of every story. If you don't have restrictions, you can have a magic system with no restrictions at all. But then instead you want to have consequences. So, it might be that every time you use magic, you get sick or it reveals your location. So you can use a consequence that's physical like that and actually based in the magic, or you can have a social consequence instead. So it might be that using magic is completely illegal. So it might be a man-made consequence, or it might be a magical consequence. But put those restrictions and those consequences in, and that's where you find your conflict with your magic system. And a strict magic system is exactly the same as engineering. You need specific steps that you go through. If one thing breaks or doesn't work properly, then the outcome is a complete failure, and you need specific resources and ingredients. So yeah, they're actually very, very similar things.
Interesting. Well, that's me told about that. Very good. And does it end up, you think, a better story if you give yourself more restrictions to maneuver in? Because generally in writing, we are told to put our characters in difficult positions, and the story gets better from a reader point of view.
Yeah, it totally depends. Some people just love really strict magic systems. I do. I really, really love them. And some people prefer looser, more chaotic magic systems. And just like anything you write, there's an audience out there for it. So with the magic systems, if you want to write tight, strict magic systems, there is absolutely an audience for that. If you want to write much looser ones with fewer rules, or maybe where you don't just actually lay out the rules at all in your book, then there's also an audience for that. So just as readers prefer different things. And a tight magic system gives you more conflict to use within the magic system, but a looser magic system, you can still create just as much conflict from other places in your story. Anyway, I mean, if you put a really loose magic system in a exceedingly dystopian world, you've already got all the conflict you need anyway, without putting tight restrictions on your magic system.
Where do you go to talk to other authors in similar areas? Because I can imagine that there's quite a lot of discussion that goes on amongst authors writing these types of worlds.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very lucky that there are some live events that I go to. Actually, last month I was at FantasyCon, which is run by the British Fantasy Society. And I have a group of friends that we all go to the same cons each year. And much as I'd love to think of us in the same way as like C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien used to sit in the pub and discuss with this, obviously I'm not likening myself to either of those. But yeah, it can get a little bit like that. Yeah.
Well, it's brilliant discussion. You've given us lots of things to think about. And it's interesting, isn't it, how it might sound, as you say, I talk about engineering in the real world and the A63 and what it was like in 1963. You'll talk about magic and other worlds and other universes, and yet so many similar themes and much closer similarities for writers than you might first suspect. Show, don't tell, have your rules in place, and don't let your cleverness get in the way of the story, which I guess is probably easier. It's just as easy in my world. I could show my research, which I love doing. I fall down rabbit holes doing my research, and it's tempting to put it out there. Brilliant. Now, I think you've got your books, obviously. You better tell us where they're available. I guess they're on all the usual platforms, are they?
Yeah, so they are all available in ebook. There is a box set where you can get the first 3 together in a box set. And I publish those wide, so they are available pretty much everywhere you can buy ebooks, including from my own website. You can buy them direct. The paperbacks are only available on Amazon at the moment. But yeah, the thing you get with the paperback is a place to keep all your notes together. But obviously not everyone likes pens and paper like I do. Some people like apps and digital notes.
Yeah, you'd fit in very well with C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien with your pens and paper and your notebook. And and you've also got this worksheet, which you sent me a link to before. It sounds like a great thing perhaps to give away. We can come up with a link in a second. Creating a timeline. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, so it's just it's a worksheet about how to create a timeline for your world, how to create the history for it, and importantly, how much history to put in your book, because we can go a bit crazy on that.
Yeah, very good advice. So if we say selfpublishingformula.com/world building, all one word, then I'll make sure that the link to that book is there. And that's great, Angeline. So
yeah, it's been fun. I can talk about world building forever. So
Well, I think we will have to talk about it again because it's been a really interesting interview. And like I say, the common themes always strike me as a very, it'll be enjoyed, I think, beyond people just writing fantasy books, because I've learned from it as well. And you're in England. I think you're the second person in the row I've interviewed who's here in jolly old England.
Yay!
Whereabouts are you?
In the Midlands. Although not from there originally, hence the accent. I actually grew up on the edge of Dartmoor, so it was interesting you saying about that. Yeah, Hound of the Baskervilles was set just down the road from where I grew up.
There you go. Yeah, we did mention that, didn't we? Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, Angeline, thank you very much indeed. And if people pop over to selfpublishingformula.com/world building to get that timeline book, and check out the books on Amazon. The actual paperbacks sound perfect, don't they? Do a bit of actual world building.
Yeah, collect all your notes in one place.
Angeline, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There we go. I mean, you write fiction set in the real world with real things. You don't have hover cars, or you're not in the future, and there's no wizards or magic. But nonetheless, I bet you still struggle sometimes to remember what you've created, what's available, who's done what, and all the rest of it.
Oh, God,
so
I've written 40 books. It's very easy to forget. So I've actually got someone from the community, actually, who I said it would be up for this, that they kind of maintain a Bible for me. So they read the books and they'll update a document that I can then go back and see. I mean, this is not really world building, but it is a matter of consistency. I've a couple of times I've been pulled up by advanced readers after I've stubbornly tried to include a character I killed off in a previous book, and she's like, "You've done it again. He's dead." So that has been a challenge, but just about managed to get over it.
Oh wow. That wasn't spotted after publication.
No, thankfully no. She spotted it before it went out, and both times the same person spotted it twice. So she's well attuned to this character popping up when he's supposed to be 6 feet under.
Yeah, and of course, as we mentioned in the interview, to help you with that process, Angeline does have a book available to you, which is called Creating a Timeline by Angeline Trevena. We can give that away to you for free if you go to selfpublishingformula.com/world building. All one word. Very useful. Angeline has put a lot of thought into how this works and to bring some structure to it. Yeah, so that's it. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for this. Next time you and I record a wrap, hopefully we'll be in the desert or in the oasis that is Las Vegas, and then we'll be back after that and we'll talk about the conference a bit, and we've got some good stuff to come, really good interviews, and we'll try and pick up some guests. One of the things I think Tom and I will do in particular is we'll go to as many sessions as possible in 20 books and pick out those people giving really good value lessons for indie authors, and we'll get them on the podcast. So you don't have to go to Vegas if you don't want to. Right, that's it. Let's go and get something stuffed up our noses.
Oh yeah,
not that old thing, not that stuff you used to do when you were a lawyer. But
we'll do that in Vegas.
Sticks. No, not with me. A little beer will do for me. Thank you very much indeed. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him
and a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.